Hello and welcome to this Magellan update. I'm Amy Krizanovic, the head of ESG, and today I'm joined by Elisa DeMarco, portfolio manager of Core Global and Core ESG strategies. Welcome, Elisa.
Thanks, Amy. Really looking forward to our discussion of what the investment team has been up to in relation to ESG, but then also unpacking some of those enduring themes that we invest behind, like artificial intelligence, decarbonisation, and the GLP-1 obesity drugs.
Well, Elisa, it's been a really busy year. We've had almost 400 meetings with almost 200 companies talking about a lot of these really interesting environmental, social and governance themes. We're also really pleased to have received RIA product certification for Core ESG, which you manage. But getting into those enduring themes, we're often talking about the revenue opportunities, but it's also really important to talk about the ESG risk assessment. So in your role as a portfolio manager, could you talk about why it's important to have ESG analysis as part of that portfolio construction?
Thanks, Amy. That is a really important place to start, really unpacking how ESG fits into our investment process, but more importantly, how ESG fits into our definition of quality. So just a reminder about what we're looking at when we're thinking about what makes a quality company. We're looking for those unique attributes that will enable a company to protect and grow earnings into the future. So looking at ESG risks and opportunities and the materiality of those risks and opportunities is a really key part to our process. So what we're doing when we're looking at our ESG risk assessment is we're looking at, well, what risks is a company exposed to, but then also what is the impact? So that's where we're looking at, well, how is a company managing the exposure to their risk? And that really forms the backbone for how we think about ESG risk assessment at Magellan. And it's our North Star for our ESG scoring, but then also to drive the engagements that we have with the companies that we invest in. So specifically for the Core ESG fund, our rules-based funds, we input the ESG score as a larger weighting in the overall quality score. So this has the effect of upweighting companies that have a lower ESG risk or a greater ESG opportunity. Amy, let's pivot now to those enduring themes that I touched on earlier, starting with artificial intelligence. So there's been a lot of buzz about AI, specifically generative AI in recent years. And a lot of the conversations are often about the revenue opportunities, be it on productivity or that innovation in technology. How should we be thinking about the risks and specifically the risks associated with responsible AI?
Sure. Well, the opportunities really are so exciting, but it is important, as you spoke about with our process, to think about those risks and those ESG risks. And there's quite a few that we consider. But today I just want to focus on the human rights impacts to users. So what does that mean? It can mean anything from, cyber attacks, fraud, even copyright infringement. And we've already started to see some examples of this being litigated with existing legislation. For example, the New York Times is suing Microsoft and OpenAI for copyright infringement. But if we think about some of those other human rights risks that we do need to consider as investors, it could include discrimination, misinformation, or content, and particularly when we're thinking about our more vulnerable groups like children. So then we need to bring it back to that investor lens as we do as part of our process. And we think about that materiality and impact to cash flows. So the impact to cash flows could be quite significant if mismanaged. And that could include regulatory fines, reputation, which could impact product adoption, and even bans on business models. So bringing that all together in our Magellan investment process, we identify those risks, we link it back to cash flows, we use it in our scoring that you touched on, and also to prioritise engagement.
So important, Amy. Given the longevity of this enduring theme of artificial intelligence, it's really important for us to assess the risks of some of our core holdings, like Alphabet and Microsoft. We touched on engagement briefly. It's such an important part of our process to help with that risk assessment and the conviction in how we're thinking about risks, but also to influence the companies that we are investing in. Would you be able to share some of the examples of how you're working with our portfolio companies to address the management of responsible AI risk?
So when considering the risks that I just spoke on, and I know you touched on a few there, we do need to think about it in the context of the tech developer as well as the companies that are implementing AI. And I think over time, that'll be many more of our portfolio companies. So it's really important to ensure that they've got ethical AI principles up front when they're either designing these products or implementing them in their business. And they've got that human oversight in terms of that monitoring of what's coming out in terms of content. So that's where we start. And then we also think about our process, which you mentioned. So what is the risk? And we do see the risk as increasing, given the increased regulation, including, for example, the EU AI Act and existing legislation that already exists today. So maybe making it a little bit more practical, because it can be quite complex to analyse this for these big tech companies with such an emerging part of the industry. I'm going to talk about Microsoft. So we've been having a conversation with Microsoft about this human oversight and investing in those important resources of ethical AI teams. So you might have seen in the last year, there's been some media scrutiny and some headlines around not just Microsoft, but some of the other tech providers cutting back some of these all-important teams which have that ethical oversight on AI. So we discussed it as a team, and we engaged directly with Microsoft, which we have an opportunity to do because we're investing with them. We spoke to them about it to get increased confidence about the resourcing and structure of their teams to ensure that they do have input at that early design phase and also that monitoring and human oversight. So while we got increased confidence, which is so important to continue to invest in those opportunities, we need to keep engaging and monitoring because, as we know, it is really exciting and there's going to be a huge explosion in use cases for AI.
So interesting, and such an important part of our investment process, being active investors with that forward-looking lens. Amy, I'd like to pivot now to talking about climate. So for those that know Magellan, you'll know that we don't invest in energy companies or mining companies, given their exposure to commodity prices and how that translates into our quality definition. However, we still are looking at climate risk management for our broader approved list. Could you share with the audience more broadly why it's important for us to be looking at climate risk management across a range of industries?
Sure, and it's a really good question. So we look at climate risks with that same materiality lens that we do with other ESG risks. So if you think about our investments in US utilities, for example, it is an obvious material risk for them, but it's also an opportunity. There is regulatory incentive for a lot of these US utilities to invest in renewables and away from fossil fuels. So that's probably the more obvious one. However, to your question, we do assess climate risk across all portfolio companies. And we recently enhanced this process, really drawing on that deep industry knowledge of our analysts, looking at the credibility of their climate strategies. So why do we do this? There's many reasons why we do it, but I'm just going to touch on two today. So the first is around energy cost and certainty of supply. So if you think about a lot of the multinationals that we're investing in, if that's on manufacturing or even some of the tech providers, they are big users of energy, and energy costs can be quite a significant financial cost for them. Even talking about those AI examples that we just discussed, there is a lot of data out there, but the conclusion really is that this generative AI is going to take significantly more computing power than traditional solutions. And so it's really imperative for these companies to ensure not just reducing emissions, but that certainty of supply. So let's go back to Microsoft, which we just spoke about earlier. This year, they actually signed the largest corporate renewable contract that we've seen. And that's really exciting. And when you talk to them about this, it really is not just about meeting their emission reduction goals, it's about reducing cost and that certainty of supply. When you're thinking about powering those all-important data centers and the cloud to enable those AI opportunities. So that's really how we think about it from that perspective. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the physical impacts of climate change. And you asked about broader companies across our portfolio. So I'm going to talk about McDonald's. You might not naturally think about this, but when we think about the sheer scale of McDonald's and that agricultural supply chain and the footprint of their franchisees, it really is significant. So to have targets and a clear strategy in place is imperative to ensure that they manage their supply and their input costs. So let's just think about it for a minute. If you think about floods, fire, storms, hurricanes, that can really impact yields, which can impact supply and cost of those key ingredients. So we were just looking at a piece of research which was done in collaboration with the European Central Bank, which points to higher temperatures in the next decade could lead to 1 to 3% increase in food inflation per year. So if you think about what we've all just been through in that inflationary environment, we felt it as consumers, there can be a real impact on consumer demand. So this is a really important risk for McDonald's to manage. So if we come back with our investor lens, our role is to engage with McDonald's, review their strategy and their targets, and ensure that they are prepared for these changing physical climate risks. And we're really pleased to see that McDonald's has been more ambitious in their targets, but it's still a challenge to meet them. And that's why it's so important to continue to engage with them and ensure they are progressing towards those targets.
Thanks, Amy. Such interesting examples, really highlighting the importance of managing climate risk, not just for the short term, but also those longer term impacts that could be impacting the cash flows for the companies that we're investing in.
Yes, Elisa. So with that longer term lens, when we think about integrating it into our ESG risk assessment and our overall climate risk assessment for all of our portfolios, I'm actually really interested to hear how you as a portfolio manager integrate this into core ESG.
Thanks, Amy. It's a really important part of the core ESG's investment process. So the core ESG fund has an objective to have materially lower carbon risk than the index. So we've made a commitment that the carbon intensity of the fund will be less than a third of the MSCI World benchmark. So how do we get there? The first one is that we're using our low carbon framework, and then second, it's that credibility of targets that you touched on a little bit earlier. So first on the low carbon framework. So here we have a cap on the carbon intensity that the companies we invest in can have. And that cap is linked to the Paris Agreement, ensuring that we're on that net zero transition. So the second element that we look at with the low carbon framework is looking at, well, how do fossil fuels impact the potential quality of the business? So for companies whose business models are inextricably linked to fossil fuels, so think here about Cummins, the diesel manufacturer, engine manufacturer, they're excluded from the universe because of that link between fossil fuels and the quality of the business. The last part that we look at, as we mentioned, was that credibility of targets. And this is a really important part of the process because it gives us conviction in the companies that we're investing in their ability to decarbonize into the future. So we're taking that forward-looking lens to understand, well, how will they be decarbonizing and what is the credibility? So it's looking at how they, what the targets look like. Do they have external accreditation? Are there links to their remuneration? So this process, combined with the ESG scoring framework and integration that I mentioned earlier, were really key elements in achieving the Sustainable Plus rating from RIA earlier this year. Now, we're really proud to get that highest rating when it comes to ESG certification. It's a real testament to the work that the investment team has been doing for many years now.
Thanks, Elisa, and it is really exciting to get that recognition of the RIA certification. So well done, and we look forward to seeing more conversations about that in the future. Elisa, another exciting opportunity and enduring theme that we've been talking about is in health and wellness, and it is the GLP-1 or the weight loss drugs. Now, this is obviously an opportunity for the drug manufacturers, but is this a risk to our consumer staples investments?
Yeah, Amy, this is a really important question that we've been asking ourselves for our consumer staples coverage, and that's including Nestlé, Pepsi, and Coca Cola. So just a tiny bit on the science and what these GLP-1 obesity medications represent. So that's Ozempic and Wegovy. So what the medications are doing is stimulating the brain to then reduce your hunger. So the end result is that those that are on these medications typically are needing a lower calorie intake. So when we step back then and think about, well, is this a risk for our consumer staples companies? This really is what we would call a form factor change. So it's been probably 20 years that consumer staples companies have really needed to be a little bit more innovative and nimble, ensuring that they're able to change with the evolving needs of the consumer. And so when we're looking at the quality of a consumer staples company, it's their ability to pivot and to innovate and to meet those changing consumer needs. So some of the things that we've seen from our companies recently is the increased focus on plant-based foods and products. It's also offering products that have lower sugar, fats, and salt content. But when we're looking at it from the GLP-1 angle, what our companies are needing to do now is to have smaller portion sizes, but also a lower calorie option. Coca Cola is a great example of a company that has been innovative in this space. So they've increased their range of products in that zero sugar or flavored water category, but then also offering the smaller product sizes. So that means that your more health conscious consumer can have multiple occasions now to consume Coca-Cola products, but to also retain their connection to that core Coke product that we know and love the business for.
So going back to engagement, could you talk about some of the conversations that we're having with these companies?
No, absolutely. So I think Nestlé is a really good example. It's a company that we've been investing in for a long time here at Magellan, but it's also the largest consumer staples company in the world. Now, what is pleasing about Nestlé is that they do continue to innovate within their product range. So we've seen that increased investment in vitamins and pet food, but additionally, what they're focused on is improving the transparency within their product ranges. So for their food-based products, they're increasingly adding health star ratings and also the TreatWise commentary onto the back of their packaging, which is empowering consumers to make healthy choices when deciding what to choose on the shelf. Now, when it comes to that engagement side, a really important part of our role, our analyst Tracy was in Switzerland recently talking to the CEO, talking to the Chief Sustainability Officer, and she was continuing to advocate for setting targets in relation to products that are healthy, but then also to increase investment with respect to the diversification of their product range. Now, sitting here in Australia, well, how do we judge the improvements that a company like Nestlé are doing? What we're doing here is we're looking out for those new product launches. How are they investing behind their product offering? And so what was really pleasing to see is last month that they released a new product range that's specifically targeted at individuals that are on the GLP-1s. So they are a smaller portion size, but still really high in nutrients. So I suppose just kind of stepping back and summarizing everything that we've spoken about today is that consumers will be continuing to consume food. That's what we do, but we will have potentially a different lens and being perhaps that more healthy consumer. So as investors, what's really important is to ensure that the companies that we're investing in continue to innovate, to put forward a portfolio that will be meeting the evolving needs of consumers.
Thanks, Elisa. Well, given these are enduring themes, I'm sure we're going to be having many more conversations within the investment team and also with the companies that we invest in. So thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our discussion around enduring themes and ESG risk management. If you have any questions, please contact your Magellan distribution representative and please share with any clients or colleagues.